Scoring the EFPTE is based on evaluation of the level of support necessary for the individual to be independent. A queuing hierarchy is used to assess the level of support required for the client to do the activity. If a client needs to do something differently during a task, the test administrator will prompt the client with a cue. This cues progress for indirect to direct and from purely verbal to providing physical assistance. The cueing provided will always progress along the hierarchy in order to establish the lowest level of support required to complete the task. For each time a cue is required to complete the task as instructed, administrators are to give 2 cues at each level of the queuing hierarchy before proceeding to the next level. While ideally a unique cue should be given each time, there are times when it is only possible to give 1 cue. When this is the case, it is acceptable to repeat the cue. There are other times that when the cue includes physical assistance, it can only be provided once since the step will be complete. This is also acceptable. When queuing, it's necessary to prevent or correct any error. Only cue the client until they complete the step correctly. Always begin with the least direct cue type, and work your way down the hierarchy if necessary. The first cue is indirect verbal guidance. This cue is provided as a question. The question is used to help the client take notice of their potential error, but not intended to be direct enough to tell them what the specific issue is. A list of optional queuing questions is provided on the cue cheat sheet. Select a question to say that is appropriate for the situation. It is intended to be a general cue, which means that the question you ask should apply to any of the tasks. For example, did you forget anything? Could be a question you ask during cooking, bill pay, or medication management. This would be opposed to, did you forget the sauce? Which could only apply to cooking. The latter would be considered a direct verbal cue. The test administrator may also create their own questions to provide as indirect verbal guidance, with the requirement that it not be task-specific or a direct phrase. This video will show an example of indirect verbal guidance being provided during the cooking task in the EFPTE.
Is there anything you need to consider?
If the client does not correct the error, provide a second indirect verbal cue. Remember that up to 2 cues are provided before moving to the next type of cue.
Is there anything that you forgot?
Oh, I turned on the wrong burner.
If the client does not correct the error after 2 indirect cues, move on to the next level on the queuing hierarchy, Gestural Guidance. This cue requires gestural prompting that mimics an action that is necessary to complete the task or making a motion that guides the client. Be careful to not physically participate or interact with the environment, like handing the client an item. If the client does not correct the error, provide a second indirect verbal cue. You can give up to 2 gestural guidance cues before moving to the next type of cue. If the client again fails to correct the task error, continue to the next level on the queuing hierarchy, direct verbal assistance. This cue is delivered as a one-step verbal command that directs the client to do an action.
Move the pot to the heated burner.
If the client does not correct the error, provide a second direct verbal assistance cue. You can give up to 2 direct verbal assistance cues before moving on to the next type of cue.
Turn on the burner under the pot.
If necessary, move on to the next level on the queuing hierarchy, physical assistance. This cue requires the test administrator to physically assist the client with the step while not doing it for them. This cue may require hand-over-hand technique. It is important that the client is still attending the task and participating. The physical assistance cue can only be done once per error.
I am going to place my hand on top of your hand and help you now.
Do for the subject is the final cue. This step requires the administrator to do the step for the client. Do not score for physical assistance or do for participant if the client is not able to do because of a motor or visual limitation and the client directs the administrator as to what to do.
I can't move the pot to that burner because it's too heavy. Can you help me?
Okay, what do you need me to do?
Move the pot to that burner.
For more information about EFPTE queuing, consult the EFPTE Queuing and Scoring Guidance form.